Hey everyone, it's Gamefruitpulp, and welcome back to another Building Toronto video. It's been a pretty big delay between not only videos, but also Building Toronto videos. I've just been trying to sort of figure out a time when I could sit down and record, because unfortunately my life is pretty busy. Well, I guess not unfortunately, but unfortunately for you guys, unfortunately for people who want to view my content, my life has been pretty busy, and I do want to record as much as I can, so I'm just trying to figure out times that I can sit down and get some content recorded, and luckily I was able to do some of that this weekend. So this is probably coming out on a Monday. So we're going to be talking about some things. First, before we get into the actual content of the video, just a quick sort of update about the Building Toronto map. The server that the Toronto map was hosted on is currently offline as the server works towards updating to 1.13. Because of that, the builders for the Building Toronto team are unable to work on the Bit Toronto until the server is updated. So the map is currently on my single player Minecraft files, and I'm able to access it in 1.13. However, a couple things of note for those of you who are close watchers of the series: all of the signs in Toronto have been unfortunately deleted. That's simply because the thing that let us use the signs was a plugin, and the plugin's obviously not available on single player. So once the server is back up and updated to 1.13, we will have to redo all of the signs in the city, which is a sad time, but it is what it is. So that's really all the pre-information stuff you need to know. Aside from that, moving into the actual content of the build, today we're going to be looking at some of the builds that Storm has done over the past few months. He's been working really hard, and he's gotten a lot done, and so today I'm focusing on 3 of those builds, and the style of this video is going to be a little bit different than something or the ways I've done it in the past. So we'll talk about that at the end of the video and what I sort of want from you guys when in the sense of feedback once the video is finished. But anyways, let's jump into the actual content of the video. So the first thing we're going to be looking at today is London on the Esplanade, which is the first building, and I'm going to sort of read you a description of the condominium tower written by the actual managing company of the condominium tower. So this is directly off their website, and it does a good job of explaining the build. London on the Esplanade is an exceptional condo and loft complex. Located at 1 Scott Street and 38 the Esplanade, the complex is comprised of 2 structures, the East and West Towers, that are joined by a 5-story podium. The East Tower, 38 the Esplanade, is 15 stories high, while the West Tower, 1 Scott Street, soars 33 floors up. The project adds substantial value to the Esplanade by virtue of its majestic grandeur. Completed in 2009, the construction project was taken up by Citizen Development Corporation. The London on the Esplanade features exquisite architecture which seamlessly fuses the historic nature of the area with a modern cosmopolitan look. The West Tower boasts high-rise glass design, while the East Tower features a brick look that matches that of the other structures on the street. And so there is something I think very important in this description from the property managers of the condominium, and I'm just going to read the sentence again because I think it really captures what I think this building does very well. The London on the Esplanade features exquisite architecture which seamlessly fuses the historic nature of the area with a modern cosmopolitan look. This really encapsulates why I think this building is probably one of the coolest, or not coolest, one of the best designed buildings that we've built so far in the city. This area, the specific block of Front Street, the Esplanade, I believe it's Victoria on the west. No, Victoria doesn't go that far south. I don't know what's on the west. It's Church Street on the east. This block is a very historic block. There's quite a few buildings that date back to the founding of our country, frankly. Some of them were built before the country was even founded. And so this building had a very difficult task of blending between these old builds and obviously the new kind of 21st century condominium design that people look for when they're choosing a place to live. And so an architect really has 2 kind of options when doing this. You can either go for a stark contrast from the old, or you can blend it. An example of the stark contrast could be the Royal Ontario Museum, which we're eventually going to build, maybe in 10 years at the rate we build. But if you're familiar with Toronto, familiar with the Royal Ontario Museum, you know that it's originally a very historic building with an addition that's extremely modern, and there's no blending of the two. It's just kind of a historic building with modern glass designs jutting out of one side of the building. That's one way you can sort of move from older traditional style of building to modern. The other is kind of blending it like they did here. Obviously, if you look at this building, the eastern tower is built in a sort of more brick, more traditional design that still looks like it's built in a modern era. And so it does a good job of building traditionally in the modern time. And so because of that, they're able to blend from that building, from the brick building, to the sort of modern, typical glass 21st century condo that you see in the city of Toronto. Ultimately, I think this is a pretty well done structure in that sense, that it keeps the historic value of the block intact while building and achieving the goals that the condominium developers obviously wanted with a modern tower on the west side. Moving on to the second build, this is going to be the Bradmore Building. The building was originally built in 1872 to 1873, so it's obviously very old, and was built on top of an even older building than that. Since then, it's obviously been redone, but the front facade is the original facade of the building. This was because the Canadian Heritage Trust designated a historic site. So a little bit of information about the building. This is from a website that unfortunately I didn't write down the link for. I think it's called historicplaces.com, but if you just search Bradmore Building and historic places, you'll get the full information about this building. I'm just taking two parts of the description that I found particularly interesting. So like I said, if you do want to get more information, I'll try and include the description or the link to this part in the description, because there was a lot more that I didn't talk about for the Bradmore Building that I think is interesting, but just not interesting enough to put in the video. So 47 Front Street East, which is the Bradmore Building's address, is significant for its associations with the development of Toronto's warehouse district, the local production of prefabricated cast iron, and as a work of noted Toronto architect Walter Strickland. Walter Strickland was an architect that really left his mark on the city of Toronto. He built quite a few other projects. I believe Union Station and I think the Toronto Dominion Building were two other buildings that he helped with, and a few other ones as well. So obviously a pretty well-known and a pretty important architect for the city of Toronto as it was established. The building sits on the site of an 1853 storehouse that was located on the original town of York's Toronto waterfront at Browns Wharf. The earlier foundations are largely intact beneath the basement of the present structure, and the artifacts representative of stored cargoes have been uncovered at the floor level of the Bradmore Building. So a couple of interesting notes from this little blurb from Historic Places. First of all, this was originally located at the town of York's waterfront at Browns Wharf. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Toronto, the city of Toronto used to originally be called the town of York. That's why there's quite a few things still called York. For example, Fort York, the military base, as well as HMCS York, the Canadian Navy Stone Frigate located in Toronto, are both named after York, which was the original name of the town, thus their naming. Additionally, there's still a couple neighborhoods in Toronto, North York and York, both sticking to the original name. Toronto's name was changed to, if I understand correctly, was changed to sort of bring in some more, to recognize the native or Aboriginal roots in the land. The name Toronto comes from Aboriginal language. I'm not 100% sure what it means. I actually did know, but I forgot. And so next video, if I remember, I will sort of talk about this a little bit before the video starts. Another thing that's really interesting about this building used to be on the waterfront. So it just shows how much the city of Toronto has been built out, because obviously the water is nowhere near this anymore. It's, I think, a couple kilometers south. So over time, as the city has developed, we've continuously filled the lake in with dirt. And I think this could be part of the reason why the city of Toronto and Toronto Island specifically has had pretty significant floods over the past few years, because over time we've just put more and more dirt into the lake and into Lake Ontario, and this is obviously going to have an effect on the water level. So something kind of interesting about the city of Toronto, that if you're not that familiar with how it was developed, pretty significant portion of downtown core was originally water. So this is one building where you can get a really good idea of this, is that this building used to be a waterfront building, and it's clearly nowhere close to that anymore. Another really interesting part about this is that there's still some original artifacts from the 1853 building that are just there, and the building serves some other purposes. I believe it's a Winners. There's also a restaurant. So it's not like it's a museum, but it still doesn't shy away from the history of the building. Moving on now to the final building of the video, the Spaghetti Factory, the Old Spaghetti Factory. The Old Spaghetti Factory is a pretty famous restaurant. I don't know if it's a chain or a franchise, but there's 5 or 6 of them in North America. This one in Toronto has some specifically interesting facts pertaining to the building that it's situated in. This is from the Spaghetti Factory Toronto website. They do a good job of sort of explaining a little bit about the building. Originally a blacksmith shop, built in 1898, this huge old warehouse was converted into a 600-seat restaurant in 1971, filled with a fabulous collection of antiques and truly unique artifacts, and is now known as the Old Spaghetti Factory. This unique restaurant is complete with high ceilings, skylights, antique elevator, streetcar, numerous interesting nooks and crannies, original glass-stained windows from Europe, gas lamps, a 100-year-old carousel, and countless other intriguing antiques and artifacts. So the building really does, or the restaurant, I should say, really does a good job of not only keeping with the original history of the building, but also bringing in some other history from Toronto and trying to turn what would just be a place you go for dinner into a really an experience, frankly. And you sort of are able to look at all these different things. They still have the original stained glass windows, and they bring in some historic things from the city of Toronto, like the streetcar, and allow the diner to not only enjoy a good meal, but also to really take in some of the history of Toronto while they're there. This is a pretty popular destination for tourists in Toronto. I've never personally been to the restaurant, but I know that I've walked by it at least a half a dozen times in my life, and every single time there's been 2 or 3 tour buses outside with people obviously inside enjoying a meal. So it is a fairly popular destination in the city of Toronto, to say the least. Now that does conclude the 3 builds we're going to be looking at today. Obviously, you can see that there was a little bit different of a theme in this video, rather than sort of going just off the cuff and having a few remarks written down that I wanted to sort of touch on, like the architect and the year it was built and the height. I chose to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the building's history. This was something I was able to do because of the historic nature of these builds, but it also touches on another thing I want to do going forward, and that's have more themed type of episodes. So this episode, I chose to choose 3 builds to look at that each respected the history of Toronto in a different way. London on the Esplanade was a new build that acknowledged the historic nature of the neighborhood it was being built in, and chose to blend the building into the environment by having one of the 2 condominium towers built in a sort of more traditional style. The Bradmore Building is a building that has gone through many changes over the years and still has taken sort of a background role in the city. But that being said, they still acknowledge the historic nature of the building and have some of the artifacts from the original building available for people to just see. And obviously the Spaghetti Factory took a little bit of a different turn. While remaining in the original building, they've also brought in historic things from outside of the building to sort of add to the ambiance of their restaurant. And so these 3 buildings each did something in their own way to respect the history of Toronto, and sort of did a good job of keeping the history of Toronto intact. And that's something that when you're building a city, I think is really important, because if you just sort of forget history and bulldoze everything to build the highest tower, I ultimately think it's a detriment to the history and to the message and character of a city. These developments did a good job of respecting that history, and I think the city is better off for it. But anyways, this is sort of the end of the video. Just before I do my usual outro, I want to ask you guys really what you think about this kind of style of video. I want you to tell me whether you think it's something that you want to see more of going forward, or if you prefer the more kind of off the cuff kind of I'm losing my thought here, my thought process, but like the sort of not making it up as I go, but sort of improving. That was the word I was looking for. The improving kind of episodes, as opposed to the more controlled, not scripted, not fully scripted episode, but more notes to go off of and that kind of thing. So let me know what you think about that. Aside from that, if you're new to the channel and you enjoyed, be sure to hit that subscribe button and share the channel with some of your friends. Chances are, if you liked the video enough to subscribe, some of your friends will as well. So be sure to share the content and share my channel with some of your friends. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that like button as well. It's always greatly appreciated to see support that I get on the videos, and sort of encourages me to take time out of my schedule to make sure I record more and make sure I have more content up for you guys to enjoy. That being said, hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys have a good week. My name is Gamefruitpulp, and I will see you all next time. Have a good one.